Summary. Victor Lieberman compares European nationalism and earlier notions of political community in Europe and Asia. The article argues that in Europe distinctive medieval legacies joined religious ruptures and exceptionally rapid commercial expansion to compress religious authority, to diffuse metropolitan norms with unprecedented rapidity, and to transfer sovereignty from the crown to propertied interests speaking in the name of the nation. Eventually, there are three main approaches to the development of political culture in Europe and Asia between 1400 and 1850. There is a historical rupture between pre-1750 and late 18th and early 19th century nationalism and modern nationalism. If, distilling the above views, we define the nation as the population of a polity whose members are sovereign, legally equal, and ethnically homogeneous participants in a publicly celebrated secular culture, it seems clear that no such entity existed before the Philip Gorksy has pointed to Dutch beliefs that the world consists of distinctive peoples and that there was an organic unity between nation, people, and state. Nationalism is an ambitious, demanding and systematic version of an older, more diffuse phenomenon that might be termed political ethnicity. Anderson's works on nationalism and national consciousness fail to explain the origins of these ideas. Rising literacy and pre-industrial urbanization promoted the spread of knowledge and political authority. Karl Deutsch's classic nationalism and social communication remains an orphan. The study of political ethnicity suffers from undue segmentation between historic periods because it focuses on Europe and ignores Asia. There are two types of Asian polities. The first category is the exposed zone of Eurasia, which includes Japan, Korea, Sri Lanka, and the kingdoms of mainland Southeast Asia. The second category is Eurasia's protected zone, political ethnicity in the rimlands of Asia and Europe prefigured in varying degrees those claims to cultural unity and that progressive incorporation that became central to 19th century European nationalism. The purpose of the study is to establish a chronology of political evolution in Europe and Asia. Britain and Myanmar were colonizers and colonizers. They were similar in size, political trajectory, and regional importance. My knowledge of early Burmese informs a book-length study that will include other protected zone realms and inner Asian-led empires. Myanmar and Britain had similar political circumstances between 1400 and 1850, but their ethnic identities were quite different. The population of Myanmar rose from around 2 million in 1400 to over 3 million by 1600. Britain's population rose from 2.9 million to 5 million by the end of the 15th century. The political economy of Britain and Myanmar changed over the centuries. In both the 14th and 15th centuries there was political integration between Britain and Southeast Asia and across much of Eurasia. English/British overseas expansion after about 1650 had no Myanmar parallel. The medieval climate anomaly, circa 1050 to 1300, facilitated population growth and political integration in both regions. In the 16th century, plague abatement, foreign trade, and generally improved climate brought renewed expansion, and political English and Myanmar settlers expelled, marginalized, and assimilated alien populations. Cultural standardization advanced, albeit less violently, in long-settled districts where seasonal migrants, peddlers, entertainers, and peasant producers helped diffuse town customs to the countryside. In the monastic education supported male literacy rates comparable to those in England in the 18th century. There was a reduction in intracommunal violence within each kingdom's core from the early 1500s. Steven Pinker has linked pacification to trade more indirectly. Religious reform and Sinhalese-based purification promoted self-discipline and community obligation. There are four dynamic drivers behind the development of modern society: religious, cultural, and political. English, Welsh, Scottish, and Irish Protestants fought a series of wars from the 16th century to the 18th century. Their religious and political activities were preeminently religious. Myanmar armies, which in the 18th century fought against Siam, Manipur, and southern rebels, Christian and Buddhist regimes in Myanmar promoted ethnic unity and promoted the promotion of their own religious and cultural development. There were also efforts to unify lay status hierarchies, to prescribe architectural and literary standards, and to spread capital dialects to provincial courts. In Britain and Myanmar, political ethnicity underwent three broad transformations in the centuries after 1400. Shans in mountains, Myanmars, and minor ethnic groups in the northern basin and Mons concentrated in the south. The region of the Yangon Basin once belonged to pagan empire, but by the end of the 18th century it had been divided into a number of independent kingdoms. Between 1500 and 1825 the population of the basin became overwhelmingly Myanmar, which benefited from economic renewal. Myanmar's economic growth has been driven by commercial expansion and interdependence. There has been a marked proliferation of Buddhist monasteries. Taungoo and Konbaung dynasties established a single state in western Myanmar. The history of Myanmar settlement in Irrawaddy Basin can be traced in the extension of Myanmar place names, the adoption of Myanmar orthographic conventions and loan words in Mon inscriptions, and the gradual retreat of the Mon language. Myanmars were massacred in 1740, but Mon civilization was destroyed by Myanmar invaders starting in 1755. By 1825, 80% of the people in Lower Myanmar used Myanmar as their primary tongue, sported Myanmar hairstyles and earrings, and identified as Myanmars. Buddhist Shan tributaries of Myanmar incorporated Myanmar themes into their cultural and political life. Shan principalities came under Myanmar control in the 1550s. In 1825 the Myanmar Empire was still an agglomeration of kingdoms, often with distinct ethnic personalities, all joined by loyalty to a sovereign who was venerated as world ruler, Kakavati, and future Buddha. Myanmar's reconciled Konbaung's royal court was content to leave minority peoples in peace. However, after the Mon threat subsided, the court relaxed its restrictions and sought to rebuild a polyethnic clientele. The state was the king's personal possession. Tudor dynasty, 1485 to 1603, initiated a movement of political and cultural integration that would continue and gain strength into the 19th century. The evolution of Ireland, England, and Scotland from 1535 to 1707 resembles the 16th and 17th century transformation of Irrawaddy Basin kingdoms into provinces governed by royal princes and later by short-term non-royal appointees. Reinforcing religious military spurs to British integration were economic forces. The production of high-quality woolen cloths in the 16th and 17th centuries boosted English exports, which contributed substantially to London's rapid growth and the development of a high-wage urban economy. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries London became the center of British culture. Kingdoms in Myanmar and England were based on social hierarchy. The political system in England changed from parliamentary to democratic in the 18th century. After the Treaty of Union of 1707, England, Wales and Scotland joined the Kingdom of Great Britain. In 1801 Britain was a single sovereign state with similar legal regimes, a unified monarchy, a single quasi-sovereign parliament, one flag, one customs union, an Anglophone elite culture and a distinct ethnonym. In Myanmar, there was no political culture similar to that of southeastern Britain. There were no nationalities. Rights of property holders and corporate bodies were gradually extended to the general public during the Elizabethan period. Parliament used the laws of the land to dethrone two Stuart kings. The Papal Revolution of the 11th and 12th centuries restricted the horizons of European polities. The Reformation strengthened English distinctiveness. The King James Bible, 1611, was pivotal in fostering among English readers of diverse backgrounds a sense of English, and ultimately British, community. However, because the civil wars showed the toxicity of sectarian enthusiasm, the Church of England had to cohabit with dissenters and Catholic wreck. By the mid-1700s, educated Britons had come to regard the nation as the fundamental arena for human activity and national concord as the only guarantee of stability in a post-theodictic world. However, none of these developments had a recognizable Myanmar, indeed Asian, parallel. Myanmar's economy was more developed and commercial than that of Britain's from the late 17th century to the early 19th. British national income rose 500% in the 18th century alone. Economic growth explains the strength of English and British nationalism between 1600 and 1850. The economic growth of the British Empire was driven by commercial intensification and the expansion of the state. There are many ways in which warfare and political geography have shaped British political history. The British state in 1815 secured 20% of GDP. Myanmar's potential was limited. In the 17th century and more especially in the 18th century, market integration, urbanization, printing, and the lure of empire magnified the attraction of London manners and social connections for English, Welsh, Scots and Anglo-Irishmen. Celtic landed elites were amalgamating with their English counterparts more extensively than before. The proportion of English speakers in the archipelago rose from 65% to 85%. Thereafter, linguistic Anglicization would continue to gain strength. Middle-class influence in English and Welsh politics grew after the civil wars. The public sphere grew ever more socially inclusive, politically independent, and intellectually ambitious in the 19th century. After the Reform Act of 1832, spokesmen for the emergent industrial working class began to amplify demands for democratic inclusion. Konbaung dynasty, established after 1760, strengthened hereditary distinctions in Myanmar. There is an outpouring of religious texts, histories, and legal works. Salvationist religion was vigorous in Britain, as shown by the fortunes of missionary nationalism and the Church of England. Theravada practices grew more textually oriented. In Britain, patriotism replaced religion as the dominant form of national consciousness. The origins of nationalism in Western Europe can be linked to the development of industrialization and advanced armaments, which, in my view, provided the tripod of global modernity. British Myanmar political ethnicities were driven by geography and international trade. English/British politics can be explained by two factors: first, English and British trade. Second, ecological, maritime, and montane barriers sheltered Western Europe and other Eurasian rimlands from inner Asian occupation. Victor Lieberman is the Raoul Wallenberg Distinguished University Professor of History at the University of Michigan. Lieberman-why studies political ethnicity in Asia and Europe 1400 to 1850.